Welcome to Williams jet tenders in the English countryside just outside Oxford. Now, Williams jet tenders are actually the UK's largest boat builder in terms of numbers of boats built. They build over 1,200 boats a year. They're just over 19 years old and they employ just over 140 people. And the type of boats they build are these very neat and very popular jet-powered tenders, so water jet-powered tenders. And you can see one of the water jets under here. They are supremely popular as tenders to almost every major production-built boat, from as small as the 2.8 metre mini jet up to the 7 metre EvoJet. But we're going to show you exactly how they are built from start to finish. So the process starts in here, and behind me in these storage racks you can see a lot of the molds themselves. So they make 14 different models here, and you can see all the molds stacked up. Now the first thing to do is that they all get waxed, and that is to help release the final molding. And you can see these are all in the process of being waxed or have been waxed and are now sealed, ready for the next stage. And then if we come through here, we can see where the matting and the core itself is made. So round this corner here, there is a computer-controlled cutting machine, and you can see that in action here. You can see all the biaxial matting cloth out on this table, and that machine is busy cutting it exactly to the shapes needed to lay in the mold themselves. And then over on this rack here is some of the coring. So the way it works is you've got a gel coat, then you've got a layer of fiberglass, and then you have a core material. And there are two different kinds of core here. This is a polyester core called a Divinicel, I think, and you can see it's just very lightweight foam. And they've also started using PET, which is actually recycled plastic bottles, like sort of old Coke bottles and things. So just helps with sustainability, very similar, but that goes inside, but it gets sandwiched between two layers of fiber and resin, and that's what gives it the strength needed. So here you can see all the material itself, and then that gets hand laid into one of the hulls. So you can see that process happening over here. This is called the dry lay area, and all these pre-cut pieces of cloth are being laid into the mold itself very skillfully. You can see the guys working away here. They're spraying it, laying the fiber where it needs to go, and this is that core cell material that I spoke of. So that's what gets sandwiched in and creates the rigidity. So once that has all been fully laid out, then it gets clamped inside one of these silicone bags. So you can see the silicone bag has been laid in place here, and then this is the tube through which the resin is infused into those fiber moldings. So by putting a vacuum into this actual bag, the resin is then infused gradually throughout the whole molding, and it means you have much better control. You need less resin compared to fiber, and you get a more consistent, lighter, stronger molding. But before that goes on, we're just up this end of the factory. The first step of the process is, in fact, the gel coat application. And there are two ways of applying the gel coats. You can see for a standard boat, they are sprayed with the gel coat itself. And if we just have a very quick peek inside here, we can see that happening. So that's a standard white gel coat being applied by that guy with a spray gun, and that's sprayed around the mold. And over here we can see a hand-laid one. So if people order a custom-built one with a coloured gel coat, in this case grey, you can see it is hand-applied. So that is what gives it the lovely glossy coloured finish on the outside of the hull before the matting and the resin starts to get applied. So here you can see different mouldings taking place. There is a hull moulding, a deck moulding, and center console molding. So you can see all the different elements happening here, and then the main hull itself. And once it has been in this vacuum bag, it takes around about 12 hours for all the resins to go off. You then get left with the finished dry molding. So you can see some of these over on this side. They've been taken out of the mold and are now being polished and sorted and cleaned up, ready for the next stage of the process. So you see lots of little finishing touches being applied, making sure they're all perfect, all smooth, all past the quality control. And then that comes through. We're just going back through the factory here. Here are all the stores. So you can see vast storage area. They keep around £6 million worth of stock in here, so there's never run out of the various elements they need both to build boats and of course look after them. They reckon there's about 14,000 Williams out there now, and all of those need to be kept in service. So these are the engineering cells, and once the hulls come out, they still keep the hulls and decks separate at this stage so that they can install all the engines inside the open hull moulding. So here you can see one in progress at the moment. Now they all use these water jet engines. There are two different ones. So the petrol ones are all Rotax 3-cylinder engines, very similar to the engines they use in jet skis. So they're made by Rotax, the same company, the Bombardier company that build things like the Sea-Doo Spark, for instance. So you can see this is a Rotax 130. They're 990cc. They are turbocharged, and they produce anywhere between, I think it's around 60 horsepower and 200 horsepower. So wide variety of different size and the power outputs. But you can see here is the turbo on the outside of it. You've got the 3-cylinder main casing there, and it's tilted over at an angle to keep it as low and compact as possible. And if you look under here, you can see that is the drive shaft going to the water jet, and it's the water jet that is key to the Williams performance. So it keeps them very, very shallow. It means you've got no exposed propellers. You can take them into very shallow water because there's so little draft on them, and also it means it's much easier to store on board a boat because you haven't got any sharp exposed propellers hanging down. But that is the jet itself, and there is an enclosed impeller inside there that pressurizes the water and spits it out the back. But we'll see a finished jet further on that will explain more about how that works. So you can see there is an engine mounting here that gets bonded into the hull, and then the engine is attached to that, and of course the exhaust outlet. So these all have to comply with Europe's strict catalyst emissions controls, and you can see there's a big catalyst silencer there. And then here are the decks, and once the engine has been fully installed and approved, then the deck itself gets lowered on and bonded onto the hull. And they use a very powerful bonding agent called Crestomer Bold, and you can see the hull, the deck being lowered onto the hull, bonded securely into place. And that's what gives it its strength and rigidity. It effectively becomes a monocoque moulding where the strength is from both parts bonded together, giving it the rigidity you need. You can still remove the engine if you need to. You can see there is a large enough engine hatch for doing that, but it's obviously easier to install the engine on a bare hull mould. Once the bonding agent has been applied, it's all clamped in place, and then that all cures and you get a really rigid moulding. But one of the interesting things you can see here, there is this panel here with a little indentation on it, and that is because when the tubes are attached, they need to cut a little luff rail in it. And if we look at this one here, you can see the rail has been cut. It's a larger entry point there, and then this rail running along here, and that is what the tubes slide along, lock into place, and once they're inflated, there are 3 points that hold it securely in place, and then the inflation of the tube itself locks it firmly on. So very simple. It just means that once, if you do damage a tube, for example, you can very easily replace it. The whole tubes just slide out again, replace it with a new one, slide into position, job done. Now, the only exception to the build process is the very smallest mini jet, which comes in ready built like this, with the tubes already attached and literally just applying the engine into the boat. All the rest of them come through. We've seen how the engines get installed, the deck gets laid on, and then the boat comes through here to the final finishing area where the tubes get applied. So you can see here is one ready to have its tubes fitted. It's got both the tracks in place. It's got the engine already installed. It's got the deck bonded on top of it. All the wiring and so on has been done. You can see it's all been beautifully lagged and insulated. And there is the jet in place. So you can see that is the nozzle for the jet. That's what provides the steering. So the water gets forced out of there, and the steering is very simply controlled by that nozzle moving from one side to the other. And in a minute, I'll also show you how it copes with going into a stern and reversing. But once it's ready for the tubes to be applied, we can see there's a couple of larger models happening here. This one is still waiting for its tubes, and this one here has just had the tubes put into place. So they arrive like this. Now they're all Hyperlon tubes. There are various different finishes, but they're all Hyperlon rather than cheaper PVC. That gives them extra durability, and they slide onto the tracks and then get held in place by these little plates here. So that ensures that they're not going anywhere. And then of course they finally get inflated. And here is a diesel jet. This is a 565 diesel jet, one of their bigger models that uses the Yanmar diesel engine. And you can see this is now being packed and finished, ready for delivery. But let's go through and have a look at 3 fully finished models. So this gives you a good idea of the range itself. We've got the 325 here. This is pretty much where the whole business started 19 years ago, in a shed in the founder's mother's garden, of all places. Now it is obviously in a very significantly sized purpose-built factory, but it all started with this little 325 turbojet. It's obviously been refined and improved a lot since then, but this in many ways is where the whole story started. Now, the most popular model is in fact the 345. We haven't got a 345 here, this is a 395. But what they wanted to show here was just the level of customization they can go to. So this one, for example, has a very dark grey or possibly even black gel coat on the hull. All the seat material itself is completely bespoke to match the yacht that it is going to be working on as a tender. You can see it's got a very fancy pearlescent paint finish on this helm console. But they're a very, very neat design. They've been so well thought through to act as a tender. You can see just how low the whole boat is, so that it fits into a garage on board one of these larger yachts. The one thing that's always short of is height, or air draft as they call it. And you can see there's almost nothing underneath it. We've just got these small fins, and they help with the tracking stability, so that gives added grip in the turns and makes sure that it tracks nice and straight. We've got nothing hanging under the hull. We've just got the jet, the water jet nozzle, and then the bucket here. And this is what I wanted to explain, how these buckets work. So you can see this strange looking contraption here, and that is purely to enable the boat to go into a stern. What happens is this whole bucket gets lowered over the jet, and that effectively funnels the water round in both directions and holds it in a stern. So the engine is always running. There is no neutral. So what happens, they put it halfway down like that, and that divides the water one way and the other, so it effectively stays in neutral with the engine running. And when you want to go into a stern, it goes all the way down, you increase the revs, and that blasts the water backwards in that direction so that you can go in a stern. The only slightly tricky thing to remember is that the steering goes a different way to normal when you're in reverse. So it's different to a conventional boat when you're going in a stern. But you can see, got this very clever little seating arrangement. We'll hopefully have a test drive one in a moment. The wheel itself adjusts for angle, so it's right down at the moment to keep it as low as possible, but then it tilts up when you want to actually drive it. Custom made throttle, custom seating, So you can fit a remarkable number of people, even on a small boat like this, which is exactly what you want on a tender. And then over here is a larger diesel jet. I think this is a 505. It is indeed a 505. So the great thing about these diesel jets, of course, is that they use the same fuel as the mothership, so you don't have to have a separate petrol facility on board. And of course, diesel itself is far less inflammable to carry on board. So on the whole, boat captains are much more comfortable with a diesel-powered tender if they possibly can get one. And this would fit probably typically on a sort of 90, 100-foot boat, there or thereabouts. But really nice size. You've got very plush seating. You've got sit 4 people here. You can sit 2 at the helm, another 2 in front here, and possibly even an extra person there. So fantastic capacity for a relatively small boat like this. Now, the final step of the process is, of course, quality control and testing. And here in the test shed, you can see there is an artificial pond and a great big tank where the boats get strapped in place, run up, tested, full revs, make sure everything is working. So that you know once they're delivered that everything is going to run as smooth as clockwork. And once that is done, they enter the customer delivery area where all the boats are lined up. You can come and collect the boat yourself, see it in action if you want to, or simply get it packaged up and delivered to wherever you need it. But look at this fabulous little lineup. So this is the 345 Sport Jet, the most popular model in the range. This is the 325 Turbojet. This is the smallest of the turbojets, the 285, but there is, of course, the mini jet. And then here, look, this is a fully customized one. This is clearly going onto a Pershing model. So you can have the seats embroidered with the make or the name of your boat. And here's one of the larger 435 Sport Jets that actually work incredibly well as a standalone day boat too. So all in a relatively small size range, but all incredibly competent and perfectly designed for the job in hand. You've seen how the boats are built, but the best bit is yet to come, and that is how they drive. So let's go and have a sea trial of one on one of the nearby lakes. So this is the Williams EvoJet 7. It's the top of the range model. It has 250 horsepower Yanmar diesel engine driving that familiar water jet. Has a top speed of around about 45 miles an hour and costs from about £168,000 ex VAT. It's designed principally to be a tender on board a big super yacht, probably sort of 40-50 meters or more. Really well designed. You've got seating for up to 13 people and this lovely helm position. You've got twin screens and the throttle, which is purpose designed for these Williams water jet drives. So you've got forward, reverse, you've got a little detent there to stop you slipping into reverse, even though you can do the full crash stop if you want to. Strangely, they don't have an actual neutral. The engine is always running direct drive to that jet, but what they do have is a bucket that balances it so that when you are in the neutral position, effectively you're not moving forward or backwards. If you have got a bit of tide running, you can just nudge it forward in 10-degree or 10% little extra nudges to kind of offset the tide and make sure you do stay still. But let's give it a bit of a drive and demonstrate how it works. So push forward, just starting to get a bit of drive. You can hear the revs beginning to build, and then they've got really rapid acceleration because there's so little drag in the water, there's nothing hanging down into it. You get really strong acceleration, which I shall demonstrate now. There it comes, the turbo kicks in and we're off. A little bit of bow lift, very quickly we're up to 25, we're at 30 miles an hour, 35, even in this small lake we're almost at top speed. And then really sensitive steering. If I put it into turn, just see half a turn, it's tracking round. You get a little bit of slide from the hull because even though this is a much bigger boat than the previous Williams I've driven, even at 7 meters, it still has that Williams feel and adjustability. It's so sensitive to the slightest turn on the wheel. You've got good grip and tracking. Those little fins help you keep you in a straight line, but when you do throw it into a turn, it's a really interesting combination. You've got grip, but you've also got just a little bit of slide that helps it round the corner. So on a relatively small test lake like this, it actually helps you round the corner, and it's very predictable. And you've got such control with the steering, you can just make tiny adjustments to straighten it up. So still a very good fun boat to drive, and even in this small lake, you're getting well up to 42 miles an hour within this limited area. So very nice to see that even though it's a big, serious tender for a big, serious yacht, it still has that inimitable Williams funness about it, the way it drives, the way it handles, the way it goes. The one quirk about these waterjet drives is that when you're going into a stern, everything works the opposite way round, and you have to retrain your brain a little bit. And that's because the way that that bucket at the back reverses the flow, it always goes a different direction. So normally, if I want to go in that way, I'd turn the wheel over to starboard, but if I'm right, on this one, you have to turn it the other way. And there we go. So counterintuitively, it goes the opposite way to what you think it's going to go. So that just takes a little bit of learning. There's no harm in it, and you do quickly get used to it, but it just takes a bit of retraining because you're so used to a normal stern drive boat in going the other way. So slightly quirky, but not hard to get used to it. The boat has been designed very much as a tender for a super yacht, so a lot of thought has been put into making it as practical and usable as possible. So there are 4 different quadrants they refer to on the boat for entering it. So you can come on over the side, both sides, you can come on over the back, or indeed up at the front. And there is a steadying bar to steady your way on, whichever of those entry points you choose. So everywhere you look, you'll see these little holes that they just slot into, and that just enables to steady you as you make your way onto the boat. But you can see we've got one here for coming over the bow, we've got one under each of these cushions here, and then there is the final one at the stern here, again with a little rubber cap. But rather neatly, if you do come on over the stern, you don't want to have to step over the seat, so this whole seat also folds over and then becomes a step. So you've got a lovely walkway through there. And the other thing to notice, under this seat here, if you lift this hatch, it actually serves as an access point to the jet drive itself. So if you do pick up any weed or rope or anything like that, you can literally open that hatch, undo that access hatch there, clear out whatever is blocking the impeller, and get going again with very little delay. And that's the kind of small detail feature that makes an enormous amount of difference, because the last thing you want to do is find your guests stranded because you've picked up a bit of fishing line. Now we've got seats all the way along, straps everywhere to hold you, give you some security if you're running along at full speed in a bit of a chop. Again, grab handles everywhere. This is access to the engine, so it is a 250 horsepower Yanmar engine. You can see it there. So really good access on both sides if you want to get to that. There's obviously a cushion that goes on top of this, so you've got more seating here. There's even a little side access hatch in there. Again, just giving access to different bits of the engine without having to pull the whole thing apart. Small storage locker in here, draining locker, so if you've got any wet gear you can chuck it in there and it will drain out into the bilges. Bolster seat for the helm, nice and neat. Again, this will also lift up, so if you want to get to this side of the engine, so absolutely fantastic access to every point of the engine wherever you need it. Helm position, very simple, very easy to use. Got the throttle forwards, backwards, neutral. Got the little adjustment for the neutral, just to take account of tide. Very simple 3-spoke steering wheel, twin screens, controls for all the major important immediate access, so bilge pump, horn, lighting. And then more seating up here. Again, straps, big speakers for the Fusion sound system. And under here, oh, we've got some of the seats. That's the rear seat cushion. This is obviously this seat cushion, but I wanted to give you a peek in here because you see there are little latches either side of that. And if you open that up, there is a refrigerated cool box. So you can see the cooling plate here, little draining locker, but means you can carry cold drinks with you on board the boat at all times. And then forward from here, we've got storage lockers either side under both these seats. Gas strut support, making it very nice and easy and simple. Cushion stays in place. We've got a ski pole, so that doubles as both the ski pole and the support for the T-top. There's that other mounting point for the steadying bar. And then right further forward, there is an anchor locker. Might be a little bit tricky to get to because of the bow line, but we can just work around it. So you can see a fully molded out anchor locker with a special screw-in support to hold the anchor in place. So very well thought out. Now you might notice that there's a couple of other stainless steel little points in here, and that is because I can't get those out at the moment, but effectively that removes, and then you have a carbon fibre pole that goes in each of those, and then you get a bimini shade stretching all the way over to this T-top. You see the little latch-on points either side here, so you can have a bimini shade forward and a bimini shade backward. But the real genius is in fact the T-top itself. So one of the key things is how this T-top folds. If you see, there are two twist handles. The top pivots round. It's all carbon fibre, so it's nice and light. And it has gas strut assisted lowering for the main supports. And then the whole thing lays down and rests on the ski pole, which is already in place under there. And the beauty of that is that the whole boat can then fit into a normal tender garage with very low air draft, but it still has the benefit of a full rigid carbon fibre T-top. Now one other neat trick is that under this helm seat is a single point lifting point, so you can see the crane can literally hook on one of those little holes there depending on where the centre of gravity is according to how much fuel there is, and then the whole boat can get lifted up by a single crane and a single point and swung back into the garage or on board the boat. There you have it, a fascinating insight into how Williams builds its hugely successful range of jet tenders. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.